Okay. So where did you go to college, and yeah, so and what do you choose to do when you enter college?
I went to Berklee College of Music. I was initially enrolled as a vocal performance major, as an R&B singer, and I didn't really start taking songwriting classes well until I was well into my second year, almost going into my junior year.
Mhm. So why did you decide to come to the US?
The influence of jazz and soul and R&B has always been strong, and that's what I've always known about that. And going back to what I referred earlier about my first one of my first inspirations being listening to Mariah Carey,
Mhm.
her CD, The Emancipation of Mimi specifically, that was well before my college years. I remember back in my ninth or 10th grade, I would already be belting out Christina Aguilera or Beyonce, just really fooling around. But I was still pretty determined back then to stick to classical repertoire.
Mhm. And um, what was your audition like? Were you singing classical music, or were you singing R&B, or what happened?
You mean for Berklee?
Yeah.
So I had an interview, and it was pretty much them asking me what I would be bringing to the table. And I just went with the prompt. Pretty much, I was just being completely honest about the fact that there's not a lot of Thai R&B singer. So I was hoping that I could add to that and just really to get in there and hone in my skill, because that's been pretty much my passion in terms of where my heart is at. Because if you think about it this way, I want y'all to think about this analogy, the fact that with classical, I know it's good for my vocal health, but it felt more like that was my brain part of it. That was more of my moral part in terms of the right way to sing, the getting the techniques right, which is important in terms of vocal upkeep and to keep your vocal health healthy. But what I really enjoy doing deep down has always been R&B.
Mhm. So did you sing R&B for them?
I did, I did.
What did you sing?
Etta James at Last. It's
Great.
one of those overplayed, oversung songs, but I went with it because I was feeling it.
Hmm. Were you? Did they have a house band or a pianist, or do you just sing?
I had to provide my backing track, so I transposed it down
Okay.
and just went with it.
Okay. Great. Um, so was your interview in Bangkok, or did you do the interview in Boston?
I did it in Boston. Back then, I was already a freshman at a college in Wisconsin
Oh, okay.
called University. It was out in Appleton,
Sorry.
Wisconsin. So,
Can you repeat that because you froze for a moment?
oh, that's okay. So I did my review and audition in Boston because by that time I was already enrolled as a freshman at this college called Lawrence University in Wisconsin. And like what Runchao was saying, that she's from Wyoming, that was pretty much in the middle of nowhere too, except it wasn't hilly. It was more, you know, a flat plain, a farmland. It's a little town called Appleton with less than 200,000 population.
Hmm. So
It
what
was pretty
what
small.
And what were you doing at Lawrence? Were you a music major or were you doing something different?
No, yes, I was a music major, but I was doing classical music.
Mhm. So was that the first time in the United States for you?
It was the second time in terms of having visited the US, but back then I did a couple of auditions like New England Conservatory back in 2013, just a year before the beginning of the year before I started my college year.
Hmm. Right.
They had me
What
going there for live audition, but it didn't come through.
Right. So what was your first impression when you first came to the US?
Hmm. Sorry, let me think for a second.
Yes, okay.
It's been a while.
Yeah.
So I've had a lot of preassumed expectations and just really that aspiration that when I get into the US musical wise, it would be eye-opening. I didn't really feel that straight away when I was auditioning for NEC before I even started my college years. It was more I was getting the gist that it was diverse, but I didn't feel that sense of diversity in the first place. But as I as I progressed with my college years, it became clear to me that the scene is eclectic.
Hmm. Great. So what was living in Wisconsin like for you?
It was lonely at first because, like I said, I've always been a city kid. I've been born and raised in the capital of Thailand, Bangkok. So I've always been surrounded by towers growing up. But first time being in New York, when I was auditioning in the East Coast before my college years, it felt othering, but then also it felt as I felt aspired at the same time. I felt that nothing was gonna stop me. It felt lost, but once I got into a college in Wisconsin, it was the total opposite of what I saw in New York and Boston when I first went there for the first time for my auditions. It was a little hard to adjust, but at first I went, what am I going to do with this? I'm left in the middle of nowhere. You know what I mean? A city kid living in a super duper countryside long term for the first time for the first year of college, but I made do with it. And when I was telling you guys earlier that years and years after just having rice over Maggi sauce for several years, and then I started opening my mind to those new things, and I just went, hey, I'm in, I'm 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 in Wisconsin. It's the U.S. is dairy land, so why not? I'm gonna make the most out of the food. So it was one of the few things that got me through. Just really trying out their specialties like steaks and cheese, and at the same time just really learning to get the gist of how people in the US operate, because back then it was still foreign to me in terms of how I operate socially. I was pretty much brought up to be on a more timid side, but when I first got to the US, especially in Wisconsin, although people were nice, but I could already feel the straightforwardness since the very beginning, even though it was a small town, but the dynamics were pretty different from what I grew up with, because back in my high school, I would only have Thai friends.
Mhm.
And a lot of times the way that they would deal with their problems, the way that they would solve things, it would be less confrontational. It would be more of, they would deal with those issues more passively. But when I first got to the US and lived there for long term, it did once again feel othering, but as I went along, I guess I learned a lot from just adapting to the new environment, and it has actually shaped me into what I am today.
Mhm. So what are some of the adjustments that you made to the way you work with people or socialize?
To really speak my mind up, to really let people know, and to assure them that they will be the first people to know if I don't like something. And that was what I wasn't familiar with when I was back here in Thailand before my college years.
Hmm. Great. So now that you are in Boston, how was it different?
So basically, with Wisconsin, people were straightforward, but they were kinder to me. But when I moved to Boston, it became even more of a no bullshit attitude, as in back in Wisconsin, they would tell you straight up if they like or not like something, and they would still be kind about it. But in Boston, it felt more straight up. It felt more like a punch in the face. But at the same time, I've really learned a lot from just really hanging out with Boston crowds and friends from Berklee.
Hmm. So how was going to school as an R&B singer different from going to school as a classical musician?
Much less constraints, I would say, because with classical music, from my experience, it was a lot of just really getting the notes from the score right. And if I were to sing one note off, it has never been in their territory. And it just felt alienated as a classical musician, because I've always wanted to play around with different ideas, which back then I was feeling that I couldn't do that to my fullest potential. But in Berklee, there are classes like improvisation class and just a lot of things like songwriting, lyric writing that really pushed me to explore my creativity.
Hmm. Yeah. And who were your main teachers at Berklee? And can you tell some stories about them?
Sure, for sure. Um, I'm gonna start with my first ever singing teacher. He was teaching me for the first for freshman year. His name is Tom Basket. He is definitely one of the sweetest people out there. But what I really learned from him was that as we were prepping for one of those practical exams for singing, and I had to do a bunch of songs at the end of each semester.
Mm-hmm.
That was like for 2 semesters with him, and he would always choose one of those hidden gems. And I really appreciate the fact that that was the direction that he was going with, because let's say if he were to get me to sing My Cherry Amour by Stevie Wonder, people would have heard those 1,000 times already, and it would have been nothing new for people. And in a way, it has definitely challenged me to go into the territories that I didn't think it would have been possible. So I would say that that was the fondest memory that I had with my first singing teacher. And my second one, his name is Brad, and I had
Give
him
us the
for
last name too. Sorry.
Hmm?
Sorry. Can you give us the last name as well?
His name is Brad Glime.
Okay.
His last name is Glime. With him, that was more on a holistic approach, as in just really shaping my personality and my voice, and making sure that both of them go hand in hand with one another, and just to really sing from my feeling. And during my last year, I had Jeff Ramsey as my last vocal instructor. And with that last one, he really had a strong work ethic in terms of just really remaining professional. And in my last year, as a vocal performance major, I had to do a recital, and I was running into a lot of just really a lot of issues with people that wouldn't commit, or wouldn't take the project, wouldn't take the recital, wouldn't take the rehearsals as seriously as I would. And he was there to guide me through, and just really helping me establish the work ethic and the boundaries that I should set for the people that I was working with at a time, and who I'll be working with in the future. Because he did a bunch of tourings with artists like Maxwell, and sadly he passed away earlier this year. He's not with us anymore, but one of the things that I can take from him is that to remain vigilant in terms of people that are trying to take advantage of the kindness and the fact that I'm a chill person, that I don't, as much as I want to confront people on certain issues, that would be my last resort. Because for me, I'm a peacemaker. I want to keep the harmony. I want to, if we can solve issues with just really talking maturely, I would stick to that. I would rather not get down into that dirty part, if you know what I mean.
Yep.
But there are times that I had to advocate for myself and had to stand my ground. Sometimes it was out of necessity, to be really blunt, and risk having people butt hurt over certain demands. But at the end of the day, it's more of just really sticking to the deadline, sticking to the fact that we all should show up when we say that we're going to show up. If we said that we're going to give 100%, then our actions should add up to that, right?